In such a state of emergency, this kind of deployment has in fact been done before. So this is not a unique case where, you know, for instance, the Ministry of Defense has had to come out and rather pull such a move.
I think, Lillian, there is some dishonesty with the Ministry of Defense and the government at large, the executive arm, because when such a scenario happens, there is no need of secrecy. We are living in this nation unless something has happened outside what we have been seeing, or unless there is something that we are not being told. There has been no reason of requesting or even deploying the KDF.
Right.
And what happened, maybe they think in their wisdom was so much, is maybe the occupation of the National Assembly by protesters on Tuesday. And whereas that has never happened in this country, where such an institution has been occupied by protesters, the government should also ask themselves, how did this happen? How did we get here? And after asking that question, because the government and at large the executive specifically, they had the benefit of intelligence, of National Intelligence Service. They ought to have known this would happen. And it is not actually a matter of National Intelligence Service, Lillian, because it was actually in the public domain. Everybody was saying, there was actually a hashtag Occupy State House. So therefore, the government knew that these people are actually intending to finally reach State House. But they ought to tell us, is the National Police Service incapable? Were they overwhelmed? That is the actual thing that they need to tell us.
Right. And, you know, the High Court has certified this as urgent, you know, this petition filed by the Law Society of Kenya. We are still waiting to hear what exactly the ruling on this issue is. But in terms of the LSK's argument that the country may be receding into a police state, in layman's language, elaborate to us what that translates into.
We are actually fearing that we would say in terms of percentage, 30%, 40% we are almost a police state. The reason I am saying that before I explain what that is, the government, or through the Cabinet Secretary for Defense, did actually deploy the military. And we have actually seen them today in the streets. At some point, they were at Nyayo National Stadium. At some point, they actually made their way into the city and they made rounds. I don't know whether they are back or whether they are waiting for the ruling by Justice Mugambi. But a police state is not something that any Kenyan or even the president or leaders would wish that we have. Because in a police state, normally, there are some rights that normally are suspended. You remember when areas like Boni Forest, when terrorism was so much alive, the government would issue curfew. And it would issue curfew from this period to this period. You're not supposed to be outside. From this period to this period, you're supposed to be within your estate. And a police state would be so grievous such that if we slide there, we would not maybe be able to bounce back socially, politically, and even economically. Because businesses will be closed and we will only be opened when government says and when government wants. And then you may find some police officers or security officers taking advantage of that. The criminals also, they may also want to take advantage of that, because at that time, several things are suspended. The police are normally outside walking all over. You will be frisked, even if you are not necessarily frisked. People will be asked for their IDs. You'll be asked where you're going, where you're moving from. And therefore, our right to movement will also maybe be crippled a little bit. Yes.
Now, you know, it's generally acknowledged that the military are not professionally trained in dealing with internal security matters which involve civilians. And what we're seeing is that even as they do their rounds, you know, there's a general sense that there's a heavy military presence. In you know, going by what this ruling, you know, decides as regards the military's involvement or lack of it thereof, let's look at those two scenarios. Let's begin with the military's involvement in quelling, you know, the violence or controlling the protests that are now countrywide, as you can see. In terms of how far, who is their central point of command in such a case? You're saying that indeed a police state would then mean that movement is controlled. Perhaps there would be a curfew therein. So in terms of the military's involvement in all of this, what are the extreme cases that you know, are likely to be experienced in such a case, and who then would be the central point of command that would put an end to all of this?
Yes, you know, Lillian, actually that is the question that the LSK also is asking the court. Is asking the Cabinet Secretary for Defense, and we are waiting for Justice Mugabe to rule. Because, as I have said, when the Cabinet Secretary is requesting for approval of deployment of the KDF, it is normally not just for the sake of it. It is normally something that is thought through. The National Security Council, I believe, have to sit and they have to see this area at this time and for this period of time has to be deployed with Kenya Defence Forces. Now, we are in a quagmire, and we actually don't know when the Kenya Defence Forces personnel